Cool. What's the plan for the session? Is it me? Do I have co-panelists?
Yep. So,
okay.
Basically, it's everybody on this call. And with respect to you, Sid, I think because you are running the largest all-remote organization in the world, I think we'll be looking to you for insight. But that's not to say that we don't expect everybody else to participate actively. I think there's still an expectation that everybody else is going to be very, very active.
And I noticed the other sessions that it was very interactive. So that's how you want to roll? No. Cool. Let's roll like that. Can you introduce, shall we introduce each other? So I'm Sid, co-founder of GitLab, all remote company with 1,300 people in 65 countries. Lade?
Okay, hi, my name is Lade. I'm an experience and service designer based in Nigeria.
My name is...
And I currently work remotely with Google.
My name is Olabinjo. Binjo is just fine.
No, I'm done.
I'm a co-founder of a venture capital fund called Future Africa. We're an all-remote organization, have always been. But I've pretty much worked as a marketing and comms consultant for sub-Saharan African startups for the last 8 years, all remotely as well. So that's about me. I think Harriet is coming in soon.
Cool. I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Mwiya.
Hey, welcome.
Co-founder of Tebe Investment Management. We are a city development company. We are building a new economy for the city that largely is centered around global remote work. Harriet, do you mind introducing yourself?
Oh, sorry guys. Hi everyone, my name is Harriet Kariuki. I'm the co-founder of the AfriJob Network, AfriJob. We are on an on-demand professional development and recruitment platform that specializes in building teams to scale African companies.
Great. Okay. Well, it's 11. Sorry, it's now time for us to get started. Time zones are kind of irrelevant in this instance. So yeah, we'll get started. So hi everyone. We are now on the session that's exploring the impact of global remote work and in particular what it means for emerging markets like Africa, among others, but in this instance, Africa. So over the last few months, we've been living in a world that's been coming to terms with life under a new context. The pandemic has forced all of us to rethink how we live and work, and words like remote have become increasingly normalized, which wasn't the case prior to the pandemic. Remote was something that I think was growing in the consciousness of some people, but certainly not to the extent that it's been normalized now. We have over 1 billion kids outside of school across the world, and many of these kids are having to learn how to go to school remotely. University students are having to learn how to go to school remotely, and most professionals have, in some way or form, had to also learn how to work remotely. Over the last few months, we've seen Zoom's share price, or its market cap rather, go up by more than 200%, which says a lot about the demand for its services. So the question is, what is the future of global remote work outside of the pandemic? What happens once things normalize? Do we this way? Is this the new normal? And what does it mean for companies and employees across the world? Will this be a boon for employment in professional services in Africa? Will this create new opportunities? Is this a reframing of the global labor markets? Are we going to see opportunity that has existed in other parts of the world, distributed to lower cost environments, like Africa, aided by remote technologies, or rather technologies that enable remote work. As an example, we're having a conference right now. Everybody is in various countries. It's happening synchronously, and it's happening all remotely. A year or two ago, something like this would probably not have been as well received as it is now. That speaks to the change. Our panelists are people who are very familiar with remote work, either running businesses that are all remote, or alternatively, increasingly using remote as part of the hiring strategies and the day-to-day operations. I'm keen to hear more about their thoughts, and hopefully we all learn a lot about this. I myself am an entrepreneur building a city in Africa, a city whose economy in the long term will be largely anchored by global remote work. So I am keen to definitely learn from them as well. All right, guys. It'd be great for you to introduce yourselves so that everybody else who's on this particular session, listening in, understands what you've done, and then we can get started. So,
go ahead.
Sid?
I'm Sid Sijbrandij. I'm the co-founder and CEO at GitLab. GitLab is an all-remote company with 1,300 people. We grew quickly in the last few years. We went from 9 people in 2015. We tripled the company last year. We make a complete DevOps platform delivered as a single application. So with GitLab, you can make software faster. And we've been a proponent of all remote. And we define all remote as having no shared offices, no office leases. Most of our people work from home, but we also pay for a workspace if they want to. And we've published a lot of materials on that. And I'll put some links in the chat. Lade?
Hi, my name is Lade. I'm an experience and service designer based in Nigeria. I mostly work with research, facilitation, strategy to help businesses better understand people and problems so that they can create products that are useful, experiences that are great, and solutions that work for everyone and are easy to use.
Okay.
I can go ahead. Thank you, guys. My name is Harriet. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I run AfriJobs, which is a human capital startup. And we are an on-demand professional development and recruitment platform. And one of the things that is the sole reason why we started this company with my co-founder was the whole understanding that one of the reasons why companies are facing a challenge scaling is because of lack of capital and talent. But when you look at capital, it's a conversation that's ongoing. The last panel we talked about how it's hard to find capital, especially as African entrepreneurs. And talent is an interesting space because we say Africa has great talent. When you look at Africans outside the continent, they're doing exemplary well. So it's a question on the skills gap. And we are constantly talking about the skills gap where a PwC report talked about how 97% of companies, African companies, are not able to keep profitability because of lack of skills. And when you think about the cost of that, it's even more astounding because when a research that was done that shows that Kenyan companies lose upwards of $60,000 a year because of the wrong hand. And you can't be losing that much money now, especially during COVID when you're all about cutting costs. And one of the things that I'm very critical, especially when the human capital space, is companies come to us and they say, we work with over 100 companies at the moment, and they say that we're looking for talent yesterday. We want on demand, we want someone now. But then the recruitment process is kept long. It takes upwards of 6 months to find the right hire. And from that, you can see a wastage of time and resources from both the candidates and professionals as well as the other entrepreneurs. So remote is an interesting conversation because remote, how can you have access to resources when you need them most? And that aspect is something that we've been really much experimenting within the company, especially given that there's a growing supply of of talent across the continent, as well as when you think about example, H-1B visas, there's always amazing talent that is going to lack access to companies in the West, but companies here in the continent can tap into. So then it's really about matching that demand and supply of skills and ensuring that African companies, especially and within the emerging markets, have access to this contingent workforce so they can work with cutting costs, as we had considered in terms of like some of these costs like rent, for example. So it's a very interesting conversation to ensure that we are able to build scalable businesses within the country.
Cool. Benjo, do you want to go forward?
Hi everyone. My name is Olabinjo Adeniran. I'm co-founder of a unique venture capital fund in Lagos called Future Africa. We support entrepreneurs in Africa with community coaching and capital. Prior to Future Africa, in my career, I've worked in marketing communications for tech startups across the globe and majorly in Africa as well. A lot of my career has pretty much 80-90% I've worked remotely, I would say. I started working remotely in my very first job, which was in Lagos in 2012. I pretty much stuck to working remotely since then. Something that I think that has pushed me personally to work remotely is the traffic in Lagos. It's very popular and it's absolutely insane. So when I was a teenager, I was just like, you know what, I'm really not just going to do this with all of these old people. So that's something that has pretty much inspired how I work.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, guys. I guess with that, we'll just get straight into it. So I want to start with the first question, which is, what are the bottlenecks of remote work? What do you guys see as the primary challenge?
I think especially for us here, I think it's things like electricity and spotty internet, and when can you hear me? I can't hear you. And then network goes on and off, and that's I think the major thing. And I think on a larger scale, besides what is unique to one of the unique challenges to Africa, on a larger scale, I think a major problem is also in helping people work effectively remotely. So how to communicate asynchronously, how to manage all those processes so that people are not scheduling meetings every hour, so that they're actually getting work done. And then having the right equipment, especially for people who, especially now with the virus, people might not want to go back to co-working spaces. They may want to stay at home and work. So creating those, providing those materials and equipment that they need to work effectively from home.
I can jump in. I think one interesting thing from the company's point of view, and we had it from the Lade, where we were having conversations with some of our partner companies, and most of them are within the tech space. So tech is one of the kind of their center of the business as they approach different sectors. And the biggest challenge is managing remote teams, right? And that has been really around the company culture. So it's really tied to productivity, because you really lose that aspect of how can I ensure that whatever we were really trying to have, whether that's learning and development in the office, whether that's onboarding, for example, whether that's a lot of this mentorship. Now that we are all no longer together, how can we ensure that we have that continuity of the company culture? And I think that's also a conversation that really is very pivotal, especially when it comes to the onboarding process, where, as you can imagine, the onboarding of a lot of recruitment processes is happening remotely. So then how are you able to ensure that the talent that you're hiring is able to understand the vision of the company, understand why they're working, and understand why they need to wake up every morning to go to their computer project? So I think one of the biggest challenges with especially companies is beyond even technology and infrastructure is around now the people focus. How do you use technology and leverage technology, but also have that personal touch when it comes to the team, which is very crucial for work to get done. And that element really goes down to ensuring that you're building companies with with value systems, with all these different aspects that really make sure that you have talent that sticks around and is very fully engaged. I was reading this report that says it's not
working from home, it's sleeping at the office. So then how are you able to ensure that you're ensuring that your teams are able to have that boundary between work and life? Because now technically it's very much integrated. So that mental aspect and productivity is something that companies and employers are really struggling with. And it's a new phenomenon across the board, apart from some of the early companies that started off, like Sid is talking about. But for these young companies and SMEs especially, so how are you able to ensure that you're managing people remotely? How are you able to ensure that you're, tracking productivity? How are you able to ensure that there's that company culture that is transitioning remotely? And those aspects are the most that are challenging part, because even pre-remote, people are still struggling with company culture. But now it's very essential as that stickability aspect for the company and the teams.
Yeah, okay. Yes, Sid, you can go ahead.
I think that what's holding it back, it used to be that Western companies were not open to working remote. Now COVID solved that, at least temporarily. I think that a lot of companies right now are reluctantly remote, and they'll go back to being a co-located company. Most companies are reporting that they have higher efficiency, but they cannot wait to open up the office again. And I think that is due to them not organizing informal communication. So those bonds between people, you can organize that. I have a lot of suggestions on how to do that, but those companies didn't do that. So people are feeling torn apart. They don't feel like they have a connection to their coworkers. There's a lack of creativity. And because of that, most companies will go back to being co-located. But some companies will figure out how to organize it, and they will be open to remote work. So the demand for remote work is going to be much higher. I have a limited perspective, but in my perspective, power, connectivity, compute has been a problem. It's expensive to pay for your mobile minutes, but also the quality is not being high enough all the time for video conferencing, especially if you need kind of data to go across the Atlantic or the Pacific. A lot of people are working on machines that aren't good enough. Recently, I gave away some computers, and a lot of people were kind of working from their cell phone. They were learning how to program from their cell phone, which is very tedious. The electricity is unreliable, and so you always need a laptop. There might be things, but I have very small sample sizes. Where I worked with Kevin years ago, and his roommates had an irregular rhythm. Well, he needed a regular rhythm, and I don't know what that was, just Kevin, or that's more people. And then there's hiring people. Like right now, if you want to pay a contractor in Africa and you want to go through a professional employment organization, you're probably going to pay $1,000 extra just to get that contracting work done. That's a pretty high markup to contract outside. And then, of course, there's skill and cultural differences. At GitLab, we struggle with that a lot, where like everyone's coming from different backgrounds and doesn't have the same understanding. When an American makes a suggestion, it's not a suggestion. They actually think you're going to do that. And things like that. It takes a while to get used to. And then there's just educational skill level things, although kind of the online education is rapidly closing that. So that's a really positive development. Yeah, I saw you talking. You're muted.
Okay, so I think one of the biggest challenges here in Nigeria, from all of the people I've spoken with over the years, has been if we're going to hire someone to work remote, how do we ensure that they're actually doing work? I think there's a little bit of culture of micromanaging on the continent. So a lot of people are just transitioning out of that culture in their daily work life. So the question has been, how do we know they're going to do work? Second question I have encountered is, how do we know that they're only going to work for us and they're not going to work for other people? Because now nobody can monitor what anybody is doing. And my answer to the first question is, set metrics, set deadlines, and then people. I don't think anybody wants to get fired or wants to lose their jobs. So people will work, if they're able to. If you've hired talent that's good enough to do the work, they will do the work. For the second question, people already do a lot of. People in the knowledge industry, whether they are developers or designers or work in content marketing or something, already work for other people anyways, whether they're coming to the office or not. So there's not much that we can do to stop that. We just have to embrace how the work culture has changed over the years, because millennials need to earn, more money compared to, our parents a few decades ago. Something else I think that has come up, as well as Sid has highlighted, is power and connectivity issues. But we're seeing a lot of telcos and power organizations sell, power bricks that can power laptop for a couple of hours, and then you charge them when you have, your regular public power from the public system. And we're also seeing companies sell larger internet packs that can help people stream video much better, for example, or that can handle more bandwidth on video calls. I pretty much always used my phone in the last year, so I think the internet connectivity is getting much better, especially in cities. It's getting much better in cities. So I would say the fourth thing I've heard companies raise is, so okay, we want to hire remotely in Nigeria or in Lagos. How do we ensure that we're giving this opportunity to a larger number of people and not just people who live within the few cities that exist in the country? I think that problem hasn't been solved yet, because the further you move away, firstly, we don't even have a lot of cities here. And then the further you move away from the cities, the less power you have, the less connectivity you have, the less likely skilled people are over in those other towns and regions. So I think that there's been a lot of shift and thinking towards that. There's a very large payment processor in Nigeria called InterSwitch, and they started hiring recently in Ibadan, which is one of the largest cities in Nigeria. So we're definitely going to see more companies approach that. I've heard founders tell me that, InterSwitch doesn't even allow their staff work remotely, so why should anyone else do that? But now we're seeing that, InterSwitch is doing it and they're getting good results. So as large organizations like that do that, we see smaller organizations embrace the work culture.
One more thing I would like to add, which is also very interesting.
How do you all think COVID will affect the future of remote? I think Sid alluded to this. Harriet also alluded to this. Will the changes be semi-permanent, largely permanent? Or will we just revert back to the norm? What are your thoughts?
I think that there's going to be a lot of companies that will go hybrid, that will try to make remote working go at the same time as being remote, and I think that's a really bad model. Yeah, I could hear you, but you can't hear me apparently. I think it's a hop-in thing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just continue talking.
I can't hear Sid.
There's a really, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I put a tweet storm in the chat that people can listen to. Or that people can read. But the short of it is COVID causes all companies to be remote, but most companies will be hybrid afterwards. Hybrid will not work and it'll be co-located again. And only a few companies will organize informal communication, and those companies will be all remote going forward. All remote doesn't necessarily be, or that they go remote doesn't mean that they'll be asynchronous. So a lot of companies will start keeping kind of US times and time zones. So there's a difference between being remote and synchronous, as in the same time zone, and remote and asynchronous. And asynchronous is the toughest thing to do. and there's going to be only a few companies. So it might be that you'd have to adjust your working hours for many if you want to work for kind of a US-based company. Of course, for Europe-based companies, it's easier, but they tend to lag a bit in embracing things like remote working and remote hiring.
I agree with Sid, because even before the COVID situation, there were companies that are already fully remote, like across the world, not limited to the US. And so now that COVID made everybody go remote for a while.
A lag from Lade's end. Not sure.
Can you hear me fine? Okay. Now that countries are opening up and people are opening up, a couple of people are already going back into the office and opening their offices back and saying people should come back into the workplace. So definitely some people will try something like that.
Off. I think you might want to turn it on. If you're speaking.
Well, that's so strange. Can you hear me fine now?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Earlier.
Okay, all right. So, so some companies will still want to remain that way and want everybody back in the office because of the fear that Benja mentioned of people actually working, what is happening. But I do think that, especially within the continent, companies I think it will make the African countries more connected in terms of a company in Kenya hiring somebody based in Nigeria or somebody based in Malawi being hired to work for a company in Ghana, for example. So it might not open up across the world where companies in the US and Europe are hiring from here because of time zone differences, like Sid mentioned. But I think that will be a shift where African countries are interconnected in that sense and hiring from the various places. And I think another thing that might discourage employers from going fully remote in the way companies like GitLab, Envision, Zapier are is that some people might not want to devote resources to creating those spaces that make their employees work effectively, because that initial cost of setting people up, helping them get workspaces, workstations, investing in tools, that initial cost can be overwhelming and they might not feel like it is reasonable or justified at that time. So that might also bring people back to going into the office. I feel that if the lockdown period had lasted for a significantly longer period, that afterwards people would have been more willing to continue being remote. But because it was like 2-3 months, so it was kind of easy. The remote culture hadn't yet sunk in fully for most people.
So how I view kind of like when you think about when you say
your thoughts.
Oh yeah. When you say
yeah.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of delay. But when people say that we are returning to the normal, oh my God. Yes. Wow.
We can hear you.
Oh, perfect. So when people say that we're going back to the normal, we're returning back to the normal, I feel like that's a very much misguided term because it's no normal. Like this is it, right? And if anything, COVID really, across the board, we're seeing companies really cutting costs by either that is like having recruitment freezes or just massive layoffs. And when you look at the layoffs that were happening, it's projects that it's what companies would refer to as redundant talent or workforce, where you're looking at like, I have this cost that I have to allocate, and I need to figure out who do I need in the next 6 months, or who do I need in strategic around. That if anything, COVID has exposed that the future of work is very much project-based, right? So right now we have most of our company partners are looking for people to come in for 3 to 6 months to work on a project, whether that's a company that is building a product, whether that's a company that's looking into a strategy of expansion, or whether that's a company that's really much looking at building a financial model, or whatever that project looks like. Which means that, when you start breaking work into projects, it means that then you can really much start plugging in people who are in your pipeline. So I feel like when companies are now having access to some of this, kind of like when you look at the recruitment process in terms of the cost and the period of time that it takes, and when you look at kind of like the results of our wrong hire. And a company is seeing the benefits of breaking down work into projects and getting people who are certified. Or not even certified, but if you go to a resource place or platforms where you can see what their past projects. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that guarantee that the person is coming on board, they can actually solve that particular project. So that aspect means that companies, as they really look into cutting costs, will realize the benefits of putting their workforce, having a core team, but also very much looking into outsourcing different parts of the project that are, depending again on the timelines, depending on the resources that they have, depending on the demand for that kind of like skill set. So that's one aspect I feel like that will continue and will be more attractive to entrepreneurs, especially SMEs. When you think about SMEs as the bulk of the economy in terms of employment here, it's also worth noting that some of the roles that they're hiring for, like finance, for example, most of the companies are filing their monthly return and hire one person to come in for a day or two. So that aspect of like you're cutting, you're really breaking down your work into projects and then recruiting on the would be something that would be cost friendly for a lot of companies. So that's why companies remote would be a growth strategy for them. Another aspect that I feel like is also kind of like very relevant to talk about is the whole idea of collaboration. If anything within the remote workforce, the collaborative nature of it means that you're able to really build systems in place that are very transparent. There's over communication in your team because you're really sharing information across the board, right? Meaning that aspect of having remote workforce means that companies will start, as you're talking about, Lade, really look into investing in technology, but also like mindset. You had talked about it, Binjo, when you talked about how we are used to this mindset of I'm coming to work at 9 and we are clocking out at 5. And for employers, you see someone, you assume they're working. But now when you're seeing the aspect of like you can now start rating productivity, you can see how many people are signing up for documents. That collaborative element where people have to report what they're doing means that now you can really start accounting for them. As an employer who is really looking at the cost-benefit analysis, some of these things will start outweighing the traditional way of thinking of, doing work and employing people and really looking at this. So I feel like for SMEs, a lot of this will be a remote workforce will be a growth strategy for them. It will be a place for them to really get to have access to skills that are hard to find in the market. And then for the other side, the knowledge workers, it will be a flexible space for them to work from anywhere. So to get access to this quality talent, you have to really think about remote as a benefit. We've talked to a lot of talent that is planning on maybe living outside Nairobi because Nairobi is so expensive. The city is so expensive that you want to work from tier 2 or tier 3 city so that you can have more savings. So in such a scenario, then you're finding the demand that is coming from the workforce, which is highly qualified, will really drive as well the employer benefits and as well as the employer policy to ensure that they're attracting the right kind of employees. So that aspect of from the company side, the pull from the company side as well as the push from the supply side will really be, as Sid was really talking about, it will be something as they're moving into a hybrid workforce, but then realizing the cost benefit of just deploying remote people or remote workforce as a growth strategy will really outweigh the costs that are incurred from the same, like things like systems and other things.
Binjo, thoughts? Sid?
So I think that something that is interestingly going to change in how we approach work in Africa is we're eventually going to move from being activity-based to being milestone-based. And by activity-based, there's a lot of work culture here where people just do stuff that absolutely has no impact on the business and the business bottom lines. But now that more people are out of the office, we're going to see, firstly, we're going to see team leaders and C-suite executives focus less on what are you doing right now and focus more on what have you been able to achieve by the end of the week or by the end of 3 months or by the end of 2 weeks. I think that shift is going to change. What it's also going to do is it's also going to help people who are now working from home or from wherever they're going to be working from to be more efficient and effective with their time. Something that I noticed that has typically been happening is during work hours in Lagos, say 9 to Lagos work hours are like 8 say 8 to 5. Lagos work outside at 8, so
8 to 7.
okay. I'll just say 8 to 6 to be fair. Between the hours of 8 to 6, there's people spending more time actually on social media than in all the other hours after that time. So you have people going to the office every day, but spending more time on Twitter and ranting and engaging in all these conversations than actually working. So now we're going to see people, manage their time properly, focus on work whenever they want to, because they know that, I need to work on this document and it's due by Friday. I'm going to have to review with my team anyways, but it's due on Friday, so I'm going to manage my time well and work on this document. Like I said earlier, it's going to also open up opportunities for people to do other things that they've been wanting to explore outside of work or even within work. So something that was really happening a lot here in the first few weeks of the shelter-in-place policies was a lot of people were starting to take courses online or register for webinars. These were things that we hadn't seen. We had seen people do before, but we hadn't seen people do them on a massive scale. And even up till now, we're still seeing a lot of people host tons of webinars weekly. So I think it's an opportunity also for employers to be able to get their employees to learn things that could help them with work or things that even are just hobby-based activities outside of work.
I totally agree. And we said GitLab measure results, not hours.
Yes, I agree with
that. For example, at GitLab, you cannot even thank people in a public setting for working outside of office hours, because we don't want the competition to be to work long hours. We want the competition to be to get results and people to focus on that. And it's super tough, but we're getting there. And it turns out a lot of activity that we thought we could measure, like software development, we have found great measures for things like that.
Yeah, I think this is something that Basecamp also has a lot of articles and resources around on how to properly manage your team remotely and focus on what's actually important, not the number of hours that people are working. Because like Ben just said, even in the office, people are in the office from 8 to 9 p.m. and they're just on social media or watching YouTube videos and not doing the actual work. But they're still meeting their targets and doing things that they need to do. So, but what happens now is people have more time because they're not on the road spending hours in traffic. They can bake banana bread and paint and go online and do online courses.
That's interesting because in Kenya we have this interesting idea where a lot of employers have a side hustle. So because of course the amount of money that you're getting and the taxation and how high it is in your bracket, it means that you can't, for the demand of the things that you need to have, it means that you have to have multiple side hustles, which means that job is not actually the most important thing. It's actually, delaying your chances of benefiting from other aspects. So that whole conversation around tapping into the passion economy as well. Now you're doing your job, yes, within X number of hours, but then on the other side, you're baking your cakes and selling them online, or you're writing your article and making more money. So really going to create even more productivity for the workforce, because now all of a sudden, because no one is just a finance person. A finance person is a finance person and something else. And maybe you need an artist. Maybe maybe you need someone who can, kind of like sell something for your company as a digital marketer. So there's all these different things that you can be able to tap from these knowledge workers and ensure that you're even tapping, across the board companies are benefiting, and then the workforce is making more money because now all of a sudden you're doing 5 jobs. So there's one person who said that the future of work will be multiple. People will be having multiple jobs, right? You'll be having 5 or 10 jobs that you're doing because creatively allocated like a timetable. So I'm very excited for that future. And maybe it's not even the future, it's now because everyone has something else they're doing on the side.
Yeah.
I think that there's tons of benefits to working remote. I put in a link. I don't think people will have a really high number of jobs. I think in big companies, there's coordination costs. So like you need a certain output of every person. Otherwise, it becomes inefficient. But I do agree that people are spinning up multiple things, and it's easier to combine them if they're remote. But I think most people will combine them with life, with taking care of their kids and their parents and their partner.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So I just wanted to, I guess, ask a different question now, which is to do with the logistics of remote work, particularly distributed remote work. Labor costs vary from country to country, and sometimes from city to city within a single country. How do distributed and remote companies manage this this arbitrage differential that exists?
So, is this about how do you pay people, or how do you recruit people, or can you elaborate?
So, do you have a uniform pay structure across the entire world, or do you pay based on existing labor costs per market?
Yeah, I'll link to our handbook in the chat. We pay local rates, and I think the majority of the companies will do that. Facebook already announced that they'll pay local rates. Mm-hmm. And this is not cost of living. It means market rates, like what are people getting paid in those areas. And I think a lot of startups actually have started using our payment rates because they have over 200 locations in the world, and I think over 100 job titles. So you can find out exactly what you're going to earn at GitLab, including stock and everything else. So the reason is, if you have a single rate, you have a chance. You can, for example, set it really high. You can set it at San Francisco rate. What are you going to end up with? You're going to end up with all people outside of San Francisco. Because for San Francisco people, it's going to be a super good deal, a super normal deal. But for everyone else, it's going to be a super good deal. So you're not going to have anyone in San Francisco. Everyone's going to be someplace else. Or you can set it really low. What are you going to end up with? Only people outside of San Francisco, because you pay way under San Francisco rate. So if you set a fixed rate, over time, your company will end up with people outside the big tech centers. And I think I believe in diversity. I believe you should have some people in the big tech centers, and you should have some people outside the big tech centers. Also, what you don't want to do is pay people a lot more than their market rate. Because if you do that and they don't like their job, they're going to stick around, because if they change jobs, they're going to have a 40% drop in income. Also, it's super efficient to pay people different rates and end up with a smaller bill. Like if we would pay everyone San Francisco rates, we'd be able to not be able to do what we're doing as a company. So I don't think it makes sense from a company perspective. I think for a whole diverse set of reasons, it makes sense to pay local rates. And we never declined someone who moved someplace else to kind of increase or decrease their rate based on where they moved. But I for various reasons, I do think it should get permission from the employer. I do hope that companies get more public about kind of the rate system they have. And it could be as simple as we pay the same as GitLab, which a ton of startups are doing. Just making sure that pay people equally, because if people don't know what you're paying, you tend to have differences between people who are good negotiators and bad negotiators, and that tends to be not distributed equally across underrepresented groups.
Very interesting. Binjo,
okay.
Lade, Harriet.
Yeah, okay. So the whole issue of paying different rates has been I actually agree that you should pay based on location, because first of all, it's cheaper for the company, and then because of the whole, where would I go to if I live here, who will pay me this much? But then there's the challenge of, if I want to move to a new city or a new country, will my pay increase or reduce depending on that? So that can also lead to some sort of dissatisfaction with people. If I move to a new country and my pay doesn't go up to the costs of, or the rates, the market rates there, then I'm dissatisfied. Or if I move to a city and my pay and the market rate there is lower and my pay reduces, I'm also dissatisfied. So that's a challenge that people will have to, employers have to figure out. But then I also think in general, with respect to logistics and setting up other logistical issues. I think that what we'll see is more companies coming up to offer that as a service to companies that want to hire globally remote within Africa, and provides recruitment services, recruitment, staffing, onboarding, all of those things. But then also maybe a company that helps in providing all that want to work from their homes and not from a co-working space. So companies that have the whole everything you need. So like your starter kits, like tables, the so on, everything that you need to set up a home remote office. So providing that as a service to other people. And then Binjo mentioned earlier about power companies who are creating these inverters that can power laptops for businesses, like consulting services, selling products to businesses who are trying to hire remotely from within Africa, specifically on how to approach hiring, salary rates, setting up your employees for their remote office and so on, and then designing that experience of working remotely within Africa, given the specific constraints and our unique context that we have.
I do agree with what Lade said, how it's very hard to rate, especially even beyond just remote work, even with salaries themselves, right? It's like, it's one of the conversations that people don't want to have in terms of like being transparent about the money that they're earning. As you can hear, it's all about your negotiation skills. But then something interesting that has been happening across the board is we've been observing more remote work outside tech, right? So think about marketing, for example, where some of this can also be commission-based. So you have your amount of money that you're getting, yes, but then everything else is dependent on, is contingent upon your successful, closing of deals if it's telemarketing, or if it's something around side influencer marketing as a remote marketing role. So it's also interesting that there's a spring up of interesting type of roles that are also much more around commission based. So then that aspect means that that means that now people can really push the boundaries of the amount of money they can make out, depending on other different types of skills beyond negotiation. So I think one of the most interesting parts of the remote work is how we're observing that, leaving tech, and kind of like having other interesting aspects like operations and other things that you can start measuring the success based on the ability to close a deal, the ability to get something done, and you can have that revenue share. So I think that is also like a very interesting model to test out, especially within this market where a lot of people really want to ensure that they're hiring someone who can close deals or who can get work done. So when you're able to, especially when you're speaking to an employer or someone who's looking into recruiting, and there's that aspect of, okay, they're going to be here for like the next 3 months on this project, but you have all these milestones that are also very much dependent on the ability to perform. So when you're able to really have that conversations around performance-based conditions, then there's that aspect that you can really come to, it's beyond now, kind of as we're saying, you can really come to seeing other aspects of successes and ways of compensating the people who are working. So that is one of the things that I would say would be an interesting space to also experiment around, because even outside remote, it's still very hard to rate card, even ordinary talent. So then how then are you able to innovatively think about using data, for example, to be able to start measuring a lot of this outputs, as well as just rating the people, the remote workers themselves, and having that transparent information. So I feel like data will be very important, and having it open source in such a way that you're able to understand how different people are rated depending on how they're able to perform. And that information is very much open to the ecosystem for you to have access to that type of like Uber rating type of approach. So, yeah.
Mwiya, you're still muted in Open.
Oh, sorry. We have just a little over 10 minutes left on this session. So I think it might be a good idea to get the audience to participate a little bit now and ask some questions. So if anybody out there has a question, please ask. if you don't ask, I'll ask my own.
How should they ask me via chat?
Via the chat, yeah.
Cool.
Good looking out there.
So there were some questions asked earlier in the chats. Yeah.
There was one question which was asked to Sid, but I guess we'll extend that to the entire group, which is, how do you build casual bonds and interactions?
Yeah, that's very important, but also very hard. And I'll drop a link in the chat with some suggestions. But one thing that's worked really well at GitLab is coffee chats. So every week you're matched to another person in the company, and that's 25 minutes. A 25-minute kind of meeting is scheduled. It doesn't have an agenda. You can talk about work. You can talk about life. It's kind of a casual encounter with a coworker. If you like the coworker, you can keep meeting. If you don't like, there's no pressure. There's no pressure to follow up or do anything else. Another thing we do is within your direct team, we have a weekly session where you just hang out together, mostly 50 minutes. Many people bring a drink, and you just hang out. You don't talk about the work you had to deliver for this week, but you talk about everything going on in life outside of that. So we're kind of trying to recreate these hallway conversations, these water cooler conversations. We're also very intentionally trying to make sure that people post as much in public chat channels as possible, in public Slack channels, so that you kind of have that effect of overhearing conversations, kind of getting to know what's going on. We also have every department of the company presents 4 times a week. There's a presentation where you can see the slide deck up front. Sometimes there's a video, but the entire meeting is just Q&A with people asking questions. So there's, I think, 20 more suggestions on the page I linked, but the important thing is to organize it. It doesn't happen naturally. In a Zoom meeting, when the meeting is done, people just click out. There's no chat afterwards, maybe a little bit chat beforehand, but you got to take care of that as an employer.
So I want to add, there's work by someone named Jane Joton on making high quality connections, and it's something that I try to incorporate in the work that I do, because I also work remotely when I freelance with clients, so I don't go to offices. And currently I work remotely with my team, which is based in the US. So it's basically like similar to what Sid has said, scheduling, randomly pairing people up and having a 25-minute meeting, 30-minute meeting where you talk about something that is meaningful, not just so they're like in-depth questions, trying to understand some. And there's a lot of resources that they have put out on the kinds of questions to ask, so that you can connect with people outside of where you are and with your
kind of like to also add to what you both have said. I think it also should be embedded within your company culture, right? I think if you're not able to have this kind of connections in the office, it's very hard to move them virtually. So if part of your company culture is around transparency, part of your company culture is around putting humans first, then you know, and you're onboarding people, you're bringing people on board who understand the value system of the company. It will mean that then you can now start building upon that using technology. Because as Sid mentioned, after Zoom is a technology, but when everything ends, when work ends, people end up leaving. But when you start embodying a culture that is really collaborative, culture that is knowing your employee beyond just work, it's like having that humanistic approach of you understanding your people, then you'll be able to really understand what their interests are beyond work. Because going back to the phrase that I used in terms of like, a McKinsey report that was talking about how one CEO talked about how it's not working from home but sleeping at work, it really showcases how in workplaces, for example, we try to curate opportunity for people to meet outside work, right? So that's where you have coffee places where they can get to meet and hang out. That's why you have couches. That's why sometimes you have ping pong tables and all these different to create that, bed. It's like sleeping. But when people are
from home, then you have to also now try to understand the home aspect, right? It's like, what type of environment are they living in? Because especially now that we're saying remote is very inclusive, then when you are coming from like families that maybe are living in like a 2-bedroom apartment and there's so much noise. So are you able to understand the reason why they're not productive? So then when you start understanding it's no longer just work as an employee, and for you as an employee, it's no longer just a transactional affair, then you start putting the human first. And that's because there's no technology out there that can make it easy. It has to come from you, human to human. So when you start initiating that and having that as part of your company culture, then everyone will know it's the norm. And then it will be the norm to get to understand how checking on people and how they're doing. It's going to be the norm to understand why there's so much loud music upstairs whenever you're having a call, because now you understand everything beyond themselves as individuals. So this is a great opportunity for employers to start creating a company culture deck, right? It's like, what actually do you envision your entire team looking like? What is the vision of the company? What's the mission? And what's the, how do you bring people together? Because they have to be working for a reason. If people are waking up in the morning and the first thing they do is a laptop, they take their laptop and go to work, they have to be working for a reason and a mission. And I think that element is something that now both employers and employees will realize that it's not just work for the sake of work. It's work because you're interested about this topic. You want to improve your skill. You're doing it for a purpose. And that aspect is, I think, that mindset has to change from both the employer perspective and the employee perspective for this to be meaningful, for this technology to work. We have to have communication skills. We have to have presentation, negotiation, and all these different human skills. So it's really about the mentality aspect as well as then developing skills. So you have to have all these internal development processes, around communication, around virtual communities, because it's a new phenomenon. And if you have to thrive, this is the only way to thrive. You have to find ways and tools to ensure that you do it. So I think that is something, it's a chance for everyone to, beyond business models, because everyone is talking about how they're going to pivot their business model, you also need to think about the company culture.
Great. There's been another question I was asked, I think this will be the last one, as we have 5 minutes left in the session, which was, what are the most desirable skills for remote workers in Africa outside of tech? So I imagine this is speaking to people like accountants, lawyers, and such like. So professionals outside of tech.
Yeah.
I think that's like regardless of what skill, like what role you work in, whether like a developer, accountant, finance, whatever you're doing. I think that the core skills that employers look for outside of your quote unquote hard skills are the same, whether you're working remotely or full or in on sites. But the only difference I think is that there's now more emphasis on things like communication. So can you communicate well with other people? Because you're not in the same place. Nobody can just turn around and ask you to clarify what you have said, especially if you're working asynchronously and your teammate is in the US and you're in Nigeria, or you're in very different time zones, working with somebody in Australia, for example. So I think it's skills like being able to communicate well so that even when you're not there to respond immediately, they know exactly what you're saying. So I think communication and I think that there'll be a lot more work around helping people communicate more effectively in remote teams as more people go remote.
I totally agree. That's spot on. Another attribute we search for at GitLab is a manager of one. So being able to manage your own time and your own effort. Being proactive. If you have circumstances in your life that preclude you from being as effective, you proactively communicate with your manager. The worst thing is if someone hasn't delivered for a period of time and their manager has to open that conversation. So we're looking for people who can manage themselves, that don't need a daily touch point with their manager. We want our managers to be focused on coaching and helping people get better and learning skills and giving feedback, and not a day-to-day hand-holding.
The only constant thing is change. So one important skill is learning as a skill. And if you think about it from a whole perspective of Zoom might be the norm now, but in the next 2 years, we don't know. So there'll be a new platform.
So it's an ability for you to be curious enough to constantly learn different things. And curiosity is part of the learning process. So you have to be constantly curious about a skill that you need to develop. You have to constantly be ready to learn and be able to unlearn things. So learning as a skill is very critical for anyone who wants to thrive and survive in the ecosystem.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Really love the panel, full of information.
I can hear Wiza, so
Wiza,
yeah,
we can hear you.
he's closing out the session.
Yes, and
I
just
can
wanted to
hear
say
you.
goodbye. I wanted to thank you all for making the time. Really appreciate it. It's been really fantastic. For all the attendees, the next session that's coming up is around building the internet economy with Perseus Mlambo, Patrick Collison, Shola Akinlade, Odinayo Eweini, Farah Ashiru Jitubo, and Eric Torenberg. So let's on to the sessions tab, left-hand side, and then we can join that over there. Thank you so much. I hope you guys get a chance to connect. I saw so many
Thank
people.
you for having us.
Sid, I'm a very big fan of GitLab. Fantastic work.
Bye, guys.
Thanks
Thank you for
organizing.
having. I guess for the
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having
Don't
me.
forget to sanitize. COVID is not over.
And thanks for organizing. It was so cool.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Okay.